Chapter 4, Atoms and Elements. Atoms are incredibly small. This is an understatement. Look at that pile of sand there. If every atom in a small pebble of sand, were the size of the pebble itself, the pebble would be larger than Mount Everest. Think about that for a minute. In this little grain of sand, you have atoms. If all of those atoms were the same size as the grain of sand, it would be as big as Mount Everest. Atoms are mind-bogglingly small. Pardon me?
And they're still smaller.
Yeah, they're just, we really cannot comprehend, just like we cannot comprehend how enormous the galaxy, the universe is. We just can't, we can't understand that. We cannot understand how tiny an atom is. So, in a very important concept, all matter is composed of atoms. And the properties of those atoms determine the properties of the matter, and so that's one of the reasons we study atoms and what they do. So atoms are the smallest unit of an element that is identifiable as that element. There are smaller particles than atoms, but they are not identifiable as the element. If you were to take a piece of gold and cut it in half, and take one half and cut that in half, and keep cutting for a really, really long time, you would eventually get down to two atoms stuck together. You cut those two atoms, and you've got one atom. That one atom has properties of gold. If you cut the atom, if you break the atom, it no longer has the properties of gold. Okay, so the atom is the smallest piece. I think of the atom as being like a Lego brick. Okay? Elements are substances that cannot be broken down into simpler substances. Kind of interesting to go back and look at the history of chemistry. They had some pretty crazy ideas. But way back in the 5th century, Democritus suggested that if you divided matter smaller and smaller and smaller, you would eventually end up with a tiny indestructible particle. And he called those atomos, or atoms, meaning indivisible. So this idea has been around since the 5th century BC. These guys were brilliant. 2,000 years later, John Dalton came up with his theory of the atom. And this is helpful for us to look at. His theory included these ideas. Each element is composed of tiny indestructible particles called atoms. All the atoms of a given element have the same mass and other properties that distinguish them from atoms of other elements, and that atoms combine in whole number ratios to form compounds. Very important ideas.